Hi, everyone. Welcome to the commentary track for Big River Rescue. Great show.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Roberts?
Hello. This is Mr. Roberts, the director of the fine film you're viewing this evening.
And I am, they could watch it any time of day, but this is Chris Wall, the producer. And
Thanks for inviting us into your home.
Thanks for letting us come in.
Can I have one of those cookies?
This is one of those shows that has a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. Every show we make
gets harder and harder.
Not necessarily.
This is the fourth show I've been a director on.
Has challenges, and
every show gets harder.
Well, perhaps.
No, every show gets harder.
I would say we peaked with Larry Boy in its hardness, and then we had Gideon, which went pretty well, not too bad. And then Mo was hard again, so...
So it wasn't that hard. It was pretty easy in comparison.
So we had this show in production, rolling, working along. It was called Huckleberry Larry at the time.
In late 2006.
Yes. And then...
that's a long time ago.
Decided based on release schedule and kind of timing that we would instead work on The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. And hold this one for a while and come back to it. So we've come back to it, and now it's done, and now you have it, and it's a wonderful show. We're so happy to have it out.
Well, you're speaking of future. Right now, it's not out. We still have to finish the DVD
the moment
features.
People hear this, it's out.
Well, what if they have a pre-release copy? You people are
VeggieTales
special.
Theme song.
Tell
here.
all your friends.
Great tuba playing, Larry.
Are we ever going to reanimate that?
I don't know. It's like sacred.
I don't know. I feel like maybe we should get fan feedback on whether we should reanimate that.
So this is the countertop that was indeed created by Mr. Brian Roberts.
Well, I had a little idea. I had an idea that since we were doing a story about this great literary work, that it would be... Okay, comedy comes out of taking characters and, a certain type of comedy comes out of taking characters and putting them into a situation and letting them just play the situation. And so, the situation that I thought would be funny here was our characters, losers they be, in a book club. And it just kind of wrote itself from there, because obviously none of them would read the book because it's just kind of the way they are. Archie might have gotten the furthest of anyone, but ultimately I think even his attention span is too short. And I know your wife is not a fan of the jokes we make in here about not reading the book.
Well, my wife is one of those, like Mike Naraki. Of course, the story of Huckleberry, Larry, based on Huck Finn, was, Mike brought that to our attention because he just holds that as one of his top literature books of all time. And my wife is similar. This is it's a very, very important book to her. And so when we take stabs at it here about how they don't want to read it, she wasn't nuts about it.
It makes her hurt inside.
Yes.
Zachary Alexander is the name of my two nephews put together to make a real name. Zachary and Alexander. Isn't that sweet?
So Norm's notes.
Love you guys.
Norm's notes are fantastic resources for quickly getting through them. I read a book similar to these Norm's notes in college to try to get through some plays. We had to read plays, and sometimes when you're stacked up 3 and 4 deep, you just have a hard time tearing through them.
Well, and so I tried to have someone provide context for you as well.
Well, I'll just tell you, they were pretty much worthless for me because you just didn't get enough data. It was all like rough framing, so the experience of whether that was any good or not.
I wrote a paper in, I think, 8th grade about Huckleberry Finn and did not read the book and relied on such a type of book as Norm's notes. And when I got the paper back, I got like an A+ on it, but the teacher's comment was, "Great paper, next time read the book."
Yeah. Oh, you can tell. Yeah, you can tell, right?
You can tell, but the point is, I muddled my way through it so convincingly.
Here is
I got an A+ for great writing anyway.
Here is a fantastic.
But I don't recommend such behavior, children.
This animation.
Do your schoolwork, or you'll end up like me, making cartoons of vegetables.
This is a bit of animation done by John Troush, who
he did a
is
great job.
a designer here at Big Idea. He also always helps. He traditionally helps us out with our credits as well.
Yes.
And
He's been working on his After Effects skills.
Mad skills.
And I thought that would be a great little project for him to take, and he loved doing it.
He did such a great job.
And then, of course, if you've watched the credits, as you all should, always watch the credits. You see the reappearance of Drippy. Yeah, and Drippy is who did the voice of Drippy, Chris?
Some guy in the booth that just messing around with his voice.
By the name of Chris Wall.
Maybe. And what's wonderful is that map ends up being this versatile communication device for us throughout the show because, Clark Wayne, good storyteller, wants to have visual aids for all the children to be able to follow along in his storytelling. And so, kids, I hope you were able to follow along and understand, what he was talking about because he's covering taxes and
MP3 players and,
Good
old Clark Wayne. Let's talk about George. Hey, George.
Hi, George.
That's George. He was originally in the very first show he was in would have been Rack Shack and Benny. And then he was in The Toy That Saved Christmas. And then he disappeared except for a brief cameo in Jonah. And we dug him back out for this show as we were searching for who our perfect Clark Wayne would be.
He was happy to get to work. He'd been out of work for some time.
I've been out of work for quite some time. Hey, we should put that on as an Easter egg, that test that Phil did.
It's very fun.
Phil did a test of George as Clark Wayne to kind of see if the voice would work well for what Clark Wayne had to do.
There's that lumber camp.
Because the part was not written to be Clark Wayne. Was not written to be George.
Great lumber camp here. Yeah, so with George, what was interesting was we went back and looked at the great narrators of VeggieTales' time. Bob obviously is a big anchor. The French Peas have done some. And then we said, well, Grandpa George, he's also done some, and he's really charming.
Well, we went about trying to create a new great narrator and failed. And so we just had to go back and find an old great narrator.
Yeah, we've got a successful person like that. Now, talk about this introduction. These camera angles are unique for this. In that initially it was set up to be a little more foreboding, and this guy would be hidden
and even
for a while.
the location at one point was very much darker, so that we could hide Jim in the shadows.
And it was going to be a big reveal, kind of like a monster thing, where we'd have a moment where he's like dun dun dun, and there's a light, and you realize. It's
but not until they were in Huck's camp, like 20 minutes later.
So some of the shots stayed over because, like that corner shot and some of those,
we have just a few brief moments of that kind of suspense of, who is this guy, and then we very quickly reveal this big goofy semi-Swede.
Because if you look at the screen time, it would have turned into a long time of him being unknown, and it ultimately was just not.
As we were developing the story, what became really obvious was that the audience's connection with Big Jim, Little Yimmy, was critical, because otherwise when he finds his mama in the end, you don't care if you've never connected with him. So a lot of effort was spent in story development, making sure that Jim was while simple, was a fully rounded character who was engaging and charming and sweet and funny, so that when you get to the end and he finds his mama, you go, oh.
Well, it's an interesting balance because when you have Bob and Larry, who are your kind of central guys, and the story is about Tomato Sawyer's arc and Huck's sacrifice to be this great friend and to help others, as our lesson states. The subject, being Big Jim or Little Jimmy, can be a little sidelined, and so what we found is that he needed to have more dimension and charm.
Yes, more
and
substance.
I'd say we were successful. We watched this with our families, and my 3-year-old little daughter came up to me and I said, "Did you like the story?" She said, "Yes. I was so pleased that Huck helped Big Jim find his mama."
Oh.
And that connection was really what we were driving at, which is that reunion. That's really the goal of always helping others, and is the payoff. If you do help others, there is eventually a payoff that says you did a great thing, and this is the moment, which is of course at the end of the amphitheater. Which is not now. This is the chase sequence. Talk about the chase sequence.
Oh boy, I love this chase. When we originally were going after this scene, the what I was told was to make it as short as possible. Get him. He runs away. He gets on the raft. It's done. And we tried it that way, and it was boring. And in fact, what we were finding throughout the show was that it had just a really even tone, and we didn't have kind of highs and lows. So I went through and kind of identified scenes that I felt could be a really good high if we properly, if we properly built them out. And so really what I did is I said to Todd Carter, our story supervisor, hey, Todd, make this scene really funny and cool and exciting. And so he actually added tons of gags and bits, and we moved stuff around.
I mean, the hiding behind the little branch, the bear,
Yes.
which the bear is from Mo, right?
That's partially. barely. Barely.
We use pieces and parts from different shows.
My hunch is, in the end, probably no part of that bear is left over from Mo. Although you will see the Mo bear here on the map.
Now, these shots here are just a testament to our great art director, Joe Spataford, who did phenomenal work in designing a world that had this, striking visual Americana appeal, and yet it's very simple.
And charming.
So
I love that sound effect of the tax going.
The
makes me laugh every time.
The camp here went through some phases too, mostly around Huck's contribution. The tax office was always there. And that was funny.
Well, originally, it was only Huck's camp. That was way back when. But, so we added Tom's tax building when we added Tom to the story. There's our bear. Hey, bear. And originally Huck wanted to build the Huck Stop, which was going to be a convenience store that sold turkey jerky. And in development, we felt, well, maybe we could do something a little more interesting.
If you've seen Wizard of Oz, you'll know that Brian Roberts here, this fine director, is quite a fan, a thrill seeker among theme parks. And so the idea of being able to make a jerky theme park was just second nature. It just worked. It made it really fanciful. And
ultimately, it just came out of, okay, I need him to be starting a business that heavily involves jerky. Because I looked at, okay, can I take out the jerky angle? And I couldn't, because it made too many other things fall apart. So it's like, okay, I need jerky. I need jerky to be the central theme of his business. Oh, a theme park. And
it makes it appealing so that when he has to make the sacrifice to go away, hopefully you kids in the audience, are like, oh, if only he could finish out his camp. Now, speaking of finishing out his camp,
and it was changing to Jerkyland was just worth it so that we could get Mr. Jerky. Like Mr. Jerky is everything to me now.
So speaking of fully developing it, we actually did spend some time, and if you look around on the DVD, you'll find a fancy little Easter egg that has this in developing Jerkyland. And with a turkey whirl and a bunch of other fun things. So look for that clip, you'll find it.
Yes.
This sequence.
This little line, always glad to help a friend. We added that fairly early on because I was looking at Huck as a character and looking at him as a central character. In fact, this story really has kind of three central characters. Tom, Huck, and Jim form kind of an ensemble central character. If you had to pick one, in the end, maybe Tom really is the main character because he undergoes the most change. But I was looking at Huck's character arc, and I was like, he has no arc. He never changes. And so I did some research into character arcs, and I actually found that it's completely legitimate to have a character arc in which the character never changes, but he needs to become more firm in his central convictions.
Yep.
So what I wanted to establish early on is that Huck's central conviction was, I'm always glad to help a friend. But then the cost of that increases throughout the show.
The puppies gag. This was a late ad.
Yeah,
we were trying
an early ad and then a late ad.
Trying to change Dooley, because you don't want him to be. He's supposed to be the bad guy, but we had to work and establish that he's, still a little goofy. And certainly Steve and his compatriots Otto there are.
They're just kind of hapless, employees.
Yes.
Of a corrupt system, but not corrupt themselves.
So to jump back, that scene where we have Bob or Tom on top of Huck and they're trying to hang that tax sign is a little homage to Easter Carol, which is a favorite scene of ours, where in the background of one shot when they're trying to break into the factory, they're jumping on a seesaw and there's balloons and it's just all this silly stuff, and that's similar to that. Hey, so the Logger Son, talk about this.
Mark Steele. Hey, Mark. Mark Steele was one of our early Clark Waynes that we had come in and record the part. But ultimately, we decided to go with Phil. But through happenstance, at the very end of his Clark Wayne recording session, we had him record one of the voices of the Lumberjacks. He had us literally rolling on the floor laughing. We've never laughed that hard in a recording session. And so then when we added this Logger song in, we said, actually it was at the very last minute, we said, I wonder if we can get Mark singing the lead line on the song. So from the mix session, we called Mark and said, hey, we're going to send you some temp audio, record the audio and send it back to us.
And that logging song actually came from an early draft of the script that Mike Naraki had written up. It was his concept to do this story. Ultimately, Phil wrote the script, but Mike had this little song, and that got
it was the opening
again.
song originally. So I went, at some point I went through kind of all the old versions of the script we had and said, is there anything in here that we can still use in our new script? And that was one of the things that I was able to pull back into the show.
Poor Huck. I really sympathize. He has all the troubles of a small business owner trying to get it off the ground and doing it improperly. Now, this was supposed to be the big reveal that was still going to be in shadow,
right?
With Big Jim, and it's
still pretty scary. I mean, not scary.
That was your introduction. He's right behind me.
So the teddy bear that Tom just threw away, I feel, is a missed opportunity. One of the story artists, I think Rob Corley, threw that in, but then we just never did anything with it, and it's one of my regrets. That
it's a cute little toss away.
It's a toss away, but we could have done more with it.
Now, we established here that I don't like turkey jerky. We kept iterating that through the script because we were trying to make it clear that there was no way that he actually committed a crime, because we didn't want them helping a known criminal that was actually a criminal. And so we were trying to come up with these different ways to show you that, no, he didn't do this crime, and there's a way to prove it. Because he's allergic, and he actually is.
Well, because at one point our angle was, okay, well, if he really is Little Yimmy, then he couldn't have done the crime. So that's what we were kind of resting on.
Well,
but then we realized, well, just because he's Little Yimmy doesn't mean he didn't do it.
Right.
So it definitely was this. It was always a very tricky balance between helping someone who may or may not have done something wrong, combined with at one point Tom was outright lying about in this scene right here. He was lying, telling Yimmy that he was going to call his mama with his signal flare. And we just did some little corrections so that Tom doesn't say we're calling your mama. He says we're calling help.
That's one of my favorite sound effects in the whole.
The squeaky duck.
Squeaky. We're like, we want to make him really cute. And Adam Frick, who's come back as our sound designer and mixer of old, had just a great little squeak in there. It's a cute little bit.
Yeah, I mean, with the lying thing, we find it's really important to try to keep the energy focused on the lesson you're trying to tell. So if you have a character suddenly lying in the middle of a show about helping others, you end up just confusing things.
This routine here with lighting the flare. It's Todd Carter. We just said we need a bunch of gags, magnifying glass, sparks. It was very cute. And then ultimately it ends up being in the tent. I love this beat here. Wait.
That's a lot of smoke. That's one smoky signal flare.
Yeah, I haven't shot off many signal flares, but that was a big one.
I love that kind of little bit of regret on Tom. You can tell he's thinking,
slowly chipping away at Tom's hard heart to realize that Jimmy is a character you should care for and be nice and help him.
Yes.
Here's Larry getting a lashing from Bob. Pretty classic.
The emotion of the moment was overwhelming.
Poor Huck.
He just got so excited.
$100 reward. That's right. You could buy a new tent.
Now, $100, kids. I know value of money is always hard to pin down, but $100, based on the time period we're setting this in, which is 1904.
Right, so it would have been like 50 cents for the tent, and then $99.50 to finish Jerkyland.
So
right.
This was big money. All right, here's the introduction of our song. This was a song written by Phil. His demo is basically exactly as it sounds here.
Wait a minute.
It was a great moment, and even when I read the script the very first time, because you really you don't know where he's going. Mm-hmm. Why is this guy singing this song? And it's just terrific when Huck pulls out the record player and drops the needle at just the right time. I love how we make it's like, oh, he really is a little Yimmy.
There's some boarding in here. When you storyboard a character and storyboard how the emotionality that the character is going to carry here, it's tough to communicate in CG once we render it out, the same that you do in a storyboard. And there were some boards in here that Todd had worked on that were hilarious, that had these big eyes of Larry. He was just so excited right there.
Yes.
He's telling the truth. He was just like bouncing off the wall. And I always think of those when we get through these scenes here.
Yes.
He's just a happy sleeping guy. Watch it when he rolls over, though.
Got to keep the raft balanced.
All right, so this sequence is about to get crazy because the bad guys are going to show up. And we call them bad guys because their intent is not just to get him back to the camp. It's because it's to keep him quiet because they know.
Well, no, that's not to keep him quiet. It's that Dooley saw in Big Jim a way to make more money.
Yes.
And so Dooley has been illegally holding Big Jim because Big Jim helps him make more money.
And also use him as a cover, because obviously he goes on to continue to be a bit of a jerky thief. Poor Jim is at the center of that. Okay, so the dog sniff. Me and a good friend of mine, when I was in high school, he used to do this routine where when he'd meet someone, he'd sniff like that, like a dog does. You know, they do this sniff, 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 and then if you pass, they go. That means you're good.
So he would sniff
and
everyone
so
he met.
Do this. It was. I can't do it justice, but it was quite funny.
Well,
anyway, so when this came up at the tent, it was like, okay, here, let's do it. This is a perfect moment to try to play out that joke, and I thought it was pretty funny. Now that scene actually was much more sophisticated. There was a lot more detail, and it was very funny, mind you, about them being afraid of the water because of crocodiles. Now, kids, there are no crocodiles in the Mississippi, but there was fear that
there are alligators in the Mississippi.
And so he was afraid there'd be crocodiles, and so don't get in the water. But ultimately, it was just too complicated, and we took it out and stuck it with just they don't know how to swim. That's a good
silly
joke.
song.
Where did this art card come from with the jetpack?
It came from a storyboard that Todd Carter drew just because he didn't have anything else to draw.
It's a great,
and then John Trent finished it.
We do these from time to time. It's not like the Jaws, when we have.
We do it a little too often, actually.
Where it's like you kind of want to see that play out, because it's so crazy.
Yes, the platypus and the rocket pack.
Biscuit of Zaz and Roundabout. Here's the van from Jonah.
Thank goodness we had that, because I don't think we could have afforded the silly song if we had to build a van.
Great van, lots of fun.
We did
a
few adjustments to it.
So
that's where Pa Grape lives.
Let's talk about the production of the song. We were pitched this song by Andrew Peterson and Randall Goodgame,
right?
Having come off their very fun, silly song, Monkey.
And so they pitched this song about this epic biscuit and traveling on a road trip and stopping at banks. And afterwards, Chris goes, "So what'd you think of the song?" I was like, "Great song. We can't produce it. There's no way to pull that off because we could, I felt like we could do it on the countertop, with flats and things like that. But then I was like, then we were just doing SUV again.
Yeah.
We've done that. I had no interest in doing that.
So
again.
Brian and I have an interesting relationship as producer and director. We do often get into role reversals because normally that would be a producer saying it can't be produced, and then the director would say, I know I can do it. Well, in this case, Brian said, I don't think we can do it. And I said, I think we can, and so we pounded through it and ended up referencing Going Up, which was a short we had on Sumo of the Opera.
Yes.
In which
Going Up and Star of Christmas.
Sure.
We used the same trick in Star of Christmas. So I basically collaborated with Todd Carter, our constant crisis
Well, I
solver.
would say collaborated / handed it to him, said, Todd, figure out a way to do this.
No, I offered him some thoughts on how we might do it.
And Todd absolutely saved it. He came up with some really fun boards and how this could be put together. And here it is. And it's just
and it's bouncy
lovely.
and fun. How do you feel about the height of the van?
I'm not nuts about it. I think it's too silly.
You still think it's too high?
I think it's too silly.
It's not. I don't see how you can say something is too silly in a silly
song. I know. I realize that. All right. Anybody get this joke? Anybody? When they pitched it to us, we all sat in the room, literally
Well, 'cause
crickets.
they-
and like,
They got to that part and they were all excited about the joke, and they sat there like waiting for us to laugh, and we just looked at them.
like what? What do we miss?
Okay, what's next?
Well, so I guess I'm sure some of you know it, and you can just email our customer service and let us know that you got the joke. But there's a youth group joke. It's like a little game that you go around, and
This is a map. A what? A map. A what? A map. Oh, a map.
and that's how it goes.
Yes, and so that's a reference to that game, apparently. It's
I
funny.
love all your choices, Brian. Here of all the things they passed, the ball of yarn, and the Eiffel Tower, and
we didn't quite get what It's like the Eiffel Tower should have been like made of matchsticks, because the point is that's not actually the Eiffel Tower. It would be a cheap roadside attraction.
The dockside, yeah.
So they're supposed to be driving past cheap roadside
The
attractions.
signage here, the
So it
arrows,
should have been like a Statue of Liberty made of bubble gum, and
we initially had those signs up with just distances on it, and realizing that not all of our fans can read, we decided to put some icons on there, make the arrows really big, and hopefully that communicated that they were going the wrong direction. The silly song
you'll
announcer.
get it the fourth or
The
fifth
silly
time.
song announcer. So
That joke I think is really funny.
we basically, we've never established that the silly song announcer is actually a separate.
Well, we have
voice.
established it because he's always been credited separately. Whenever
Yes.
Phil gets credited on a show, he gets credited separately as Archie, separately from Archie. Sorry,
So that character
the
is a
silly song
separate
announcer
character.
is separate from Archie in the crediting of shows.
Yes.
And they used to sound, I think, a little more different, but we've kind of had this drift where they've come towards the center.
And yet it still works. I like.
It still works. We
there's
had some
enough different-
problems. Originally, the idea was that there would be no character animation on those setups, and we would just hear this kind of back and forth between the announcer, Bob, and Archie, which of course are all Phil. And so we tried it without animation. It's like, that's not going to work.
That's just confusing.
So we
This-
had to add the characters.
This tipping scene, Todd ended up taking a wrangle at it to get the comedy of it, and it's just very cute.
Very cute.
Back and forth and splashing.
Some nice lighting.
So the production of the show requires, of course, a great deal of water as well as
You're not
river
kidding.
bank, because you have to have a long river to go along, and so that presented some interesting production challenges.
Right. So what we did from the very beginning was I said, okay, what I don't want is to have a really sparse river. I want it to be very detailed with lots of foliage and trees and grasses along the bank and all this stuff. So what I realized is I couldn't afford to do that and have basically two sides to the river. So I made a decision very early on with Joe Spadaford that we were just going to build this one side of the river, and then there's a couple little islands that we can use to cheat the appearance of another side of the river. But if you looked at this set, it's not a river because there's only one bank. It's more like an ocean.
Yes.
So as a result, we had to be very careful with how we shot it.
See, he's a catch and release kind of fisherman.
Right, well, that's a little character detail about Jimmy that we're showing there.
Very nice. And then the water, they just did a heroic job in production of giving us so much water. Inevitably, when you're shooting on the river, once you buy into doing that, you kind of have to put water in
Well,
the
when you
show.
say we're going to do a show set on the Mississippi River, you're
starting down the path.
saying we're going to do a show with water.
So we actually limited the number of water shots we would have initially, and production got just a little more into it and gave us a lot more water. So we're really pleased to have it, though. Fish slapping scene.
Fish slapping. Get it? Just like
That's a
Jonah.
nod.
Oh, that's
That's a
funny.
nod.
Yes.
Oh, wait, his fishing is... there he goes. He's
That
going
one.
to catch
Poor
it.
Tom. Tom can't catch a break in this show.
And
'cause
then,
he's got a fish.
little Jimmy gets so excited here. He just wants to come and join in there. No. Oh, there they go.
Notice the sound effect on the cheerleaders' boat, if you didn't before. Somehow they've procured an outboard motor in 1904.
Lovely, he says.
Oh, sweet
In
Jimmy.
case you ever try that,
Love little
now you
Jimmy.
know tomatoes, cucumbers, and gourds float. So here's a big reveal. This was an important story reveal where
Right.
we had to explain...
And it was a scene we added
Yes.
in development.
We wanted Jimmy to explain why he was innocent. Tom's still not sympathetic. He just wants to get back and get over with this.
Well, it kind of indicates Tom's attitude to Jim throughout, and that's that Tom doesn't really view little Yimmy as a person.
Yeah, well...
He views little Yimmy as an obstacle. And so, his goal is to get rid of this obstacle as quickly as possible.
and
And it's not until much later in the show that in fact, at the train station, that Tom realizes kind of how he's been thinking of Yumi and how wrong that is.
And I think it's interesting to note this is kind of like a roadside assistance gone wrong. You know, Tom wanted to help him and was like, okay, we'll do this thing. And it just keeps turning into more and more and more and more and more, where he's just like, okay, this is more than I was willing to give at the outset. And
yes.
So this town, tell us about where this town came from, Brian.
That's Dodgeball City right there.
Dodgeball City from the Ballad of Little Joe.
Yes. This show has a relatively small number of locations as our shows go. However, most of the details are relatively more complex than we usually do. So we decided early on that one compromise we could make was that rather than building 2 new towns, Fort Muscatine and Fort Madison, that we could actually redress Dodgeball City, make it a little greener, add some trees and things, and have a town that does everything we need it to. The interesting thing is Muscatine, we did a little research. Muscatine actually was an extremely highly populated city in 1904 and would have been much more city and much less kind of frontier town the way we see it here.
This falling down scene is just fantastic.
They animated the heck out of it.
So fun. Great. Getting away quick.
What's going on? Beware the
Babies! That's a silly one.
Now, how did a baby launch a signal flare? With a magnifying glass.
See, that's a joke we set
not
up
using
earlier.
matches, because that's not safe. But
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, we kind of struggled with how can this baby light this signal flare? At one point, he was lighting it with a street lamp, but to do that, he had to crawl up the street lamp and, get near an open flame. And we're like, how can we do this? And then at that point, we already had the magnifying glass joke earlier with Huck, and so we said, oh, we can pay that joke off.
nice.
That was very nice. This is where Tom kind of reaches his breaking point. I played with actually having a scene where Tom tries to take control of the raft and paddle back upriver. But it just was ultimately a distraction, and it just got in the way.
Now here's the distraction.
Speaking of distraction.
The King and the Duke.
Jimmy and Jerry.
Great characters from the books. The book and various interpretations. These guys are always really fun. And so Jimmy and Jerry were a great choice in here, and you'll find a little feature on the DVD as well, talking about this scene and just kind of alternate ways that this could have been produced. We think this one is the funniest. Right, watch for this donut right here.
Whoa, there
goes
it
the
goes,
donut
rolling
off
off
of this hill.
You can see
Great
more of it in
job.
the widescreen version.
Great job by the animation team. Whoa,
Yeah.
what's that on the side there, Brian?
Can I talk about that?
That's a little homage to a classic television series. That
From my childhood. What was I going to say?
and we
King and
that
the Duke.
that got,
So King and the
sorry.
Duke were interesting characters. They originally were more villainous than they ended up. And I kept pulling back on that because I'm like, Jimmy and Jerry are not villains. Like, we can't play them as villains. That doesn't work. In fact, they even got arrested at the end at one point. And I I let that go for a little while, and suddenly I realized, wait, why did they get arrested? They didn't actually do anything wrong. Taking the donuts was probably on the cusp, but not something you would probably get arrested for reasonably. So I felt like a much better comeuppance was to have them have to meet up with the baker again at the end. And I thought about ways to get them tarred and feathered, but ultimately that was too
more
complicated.
bumbling and selfish and less,
Well, bumbling and selfish,
criminal.
looking out for their own best interests. I think we all know that if they were to get the $100 reward, they would go, spend it on popcorn balls and cheese curls. So they're not ultimately bad guys. They're just people who are, willing to use other people to meet their own goals.
So now the raft is fully loaded. We have a tent. We have 2 buddy gourds there, a tomato, a cucumber, and a large gourd. The blocking on here to get everybody
very tricky.
onto that little board was pretty tricky.
Well, and
Things
here's
hang
the
off
thing.
now
I
and
mean,
then.
we talked about using different sized rafts, so the raft would grow as the party grew. But I just felt like I'd rather make the raft, just this absolutely the smallest raft it can be, and still support all these characters, relatively comfortably. So what we do though is a lot of sliding around between cuts. Like the characters are moving wildly from one place to another every time the camera moves. But it works, I think. It's a fun. I still love that we made the raft is Dooley's sign.
Yes.
It just adds a nice texture to it, and I think ultimately is fun that they have Dooley's sign. Although I think, in my mind at the end they probably give it back to Dooley. Since it doesn't actually belong to them.
That's the story ending you've worked out in your mind.
Right. In my mind, in the end, little Yimmy goes and nails.
Brian's one for tying up loose ends here.
Well, in my mind, anyway.
So
it's something I have to fight when I'm developing stories because I have a tendency to want to make sure every detail is covered, and ultimately that's just not necessary. Those in the audience who are concerned about making sure every detail is covered, probably have enough imagination and
to complete the gaps
intelligence
themselves. Yeah. Mm-hmm. As long as you have a logical conclusion you can come to. That's
exactly.
So here it is. There's the big
Bob
statement.
and Larry breaking up.
This is a big scene.
It is, and I struggled with how to play it. Whether are we going for tear jerking here? Like, is this is this supposed to be really sad that they're breaking up, and should we try to pull that out? And I realized it was a really similar situation. In that case, it's not sad that they're breaking up because the one who's making the right choice is so absolutely making the right choice that you understand why the separation needs to happen.
Skilled raft drivers.
I'm gonna make sure little Yimmy finds his mama.
Then you'll be by yourself. Goodbye,
And ultimately,
Huckleberry Larry.
it's not a tearjerker. It's just kind of
And it is,
it's just
but
kind of
it
winsome.
is the biggest sacrifice that Huck will make on his whole journey here is losing his friend. As much as he's already sacrificed in Jerky Land and other things, that was the hardest one.
Yep. We even at one point had him kind of having a fantasy about Jerky Land in the middle of that scene, but it was too much.
So here we are at Fort Madison, and our train station. We never got to fully capitalize on the fact that there are some beautiful train tracks.
Wait, you can see him right? Oh, you can see him behind
Corner of the
Tom's
hat?
hat
Oh.
there. Yeah, we built these beautiful train tracks that you never see because I changed the edit at the last minute.
There's this fishing pole.
That's fun. So we had to redesign the train station to get it up high so that it didn't feel like Tom could just hop off the porch and grab the pole himself. It was also a late idea to have Clark be the one to not help, and then actually an accident in animation to have Chato be the one who breaks the pole. So it's kind of it's like Chato and Clark are kind of colluding to try to get this lesson through to
Lesson
Tom.
teaching, yeah. As storytellers, they have that right.
And I really like how that works. So actually, Clark is getting involved here. He got involved by, I can imagine him paying off those peas to say, "Hey guys, go knock that fishing pole over."
Hang on, little Yimmy.
Help is on the way. Is that funny?
The World's Fair.
The 1904 Louisiana Purchase Exposition, to be precise.
Great place. What's interesting is we came off of doing The Wonderful Wizard of Oz and had a theme park as, somewhat central at the end of it, and this one ended up being similar, and yet done completely differently in a way that makes it entirely unique. Some great design here and building, by Joe Spadaford, and
Chuck.
it
Chuck
feels
helped with this as well.
It feels very full featured, like it's just quite a place to visit, and yet it's actually
the only
quite
feature
simple.
it doesn't have is water in the log ride.
And it makes it feel very, which is funny because initially the log ride is supposed to be broken and nobody's supposed to get on it, and thus you wouldn't want water, but that turned out being a unnecessary distraction, and so we just decided it's just funnier for him to have to get stuck on the ride, having to ride it.
Yes.
I'm fine, little Yimmy. We'll find your mama in a minute.
I just think it's funny that Huck can't just hop out of the raft because that would be breaking the rules.
I know. Don't jump
And
out
Huck
the
can't
ride.
Huck
Oh
can't
no,
break the rules.
that's not his mama. That's Mr. Dooley. This scene has just a phenomenal use of extras. The production team did a great job of pulling out a bunch of characters from our cast. I'm sure you'll have a lot of fun digging through fans and seeing various characters in various costumes from different shows that we've produced.
Yes.
It's it's just really entertaining.
Well, and the credit goes to JC, our animation supervisor, who just did a great job of pulling out all those crowd shots and making them work.
Yeah, and James, all through the show, I think it's just an outstanding amount of character animation. Some really great moments of funny and dramatic.
Well, it's the same amount as always.
Right, but it's great moments.
Yes. Oh, it's an astounding amount of moments. Yeah, 'cause it's always 45 minutes.
And it's because
of
there are
animation.
some times where you just, you have characters that just play through a scene and do what they need to do and are where they need to be and say their line when they need to be. But when you push it as an animation team and make it funny or make it engaging, that's when you really win. And we have so many of those throughout the show.
I love this shot, and then I love how it pays off right here, and here, and here. Oh, there. Yeah.
Down he goes.
This is a really exciting scene. I mean, you've heard us throughout the show talk about scenes that have changed or got added to or taken out. This scene is pretty much the one scene in the whole show that never got touched from the first time it was edited. It just worked, and it was terrific.
Yeah.
It was exciting and fun, and it just worked out really well. And even through the layout and animation process, it retained all that excitement. I love this P.
So on a Ferris wheel, a real Ferris wheel, you do have to balance the Ferris wheel with your occupants. So you want to keep people. That's why they have to turn it and put one person on one side. And so for him to jump on from the air and hit it on one side, it would certainly offset the weight.
Indeed.
A little more dramatically in our case. Here's Mama Belle in her little theater.
It's amazing that she's a fairly major character in this story, and the story's almost over, and this is the first time we see her. I think it's a lot of fun
This is
storytelling-wise.
certainly a bit of an homage to theme parks that you may have attended as a child, in which they have little musicians that are playing for a group of a few people.
Mama. This is such a sweet reunion. Mama Belle was Kay Sewell, who works at she's a performer at the theater here right next to our offices here in lovely Tennessee. And she was recommended by a friend of hers who also performs there that she auditioned for this part and came in and I was really nervous about Mama Belle, about finding someone who could kind of, for such a small part, who could grab onto it and make it something really fun and funny and sweet. And Kay just blew me away, and it was such a no-brainer. Like, it's one of those auditions you just want to offer them the part right there because you're so excited. And she was so much fun to work with, and just was thrilled.
So this escape was an addition late.
It was, because we felt like Dooley needed one last gasp.
One last attempt. Really show that he's a criminal.
And it just didn't feel Dooley-ish enough for him just to stand there and get arrested, without a fight.
And there he is. He's getting involved.
Good job, Clark. Happy River. So, I guess in this shot, what you can surmise is that word got out in the fair that Mama Belle and Little Yimmy were together again. And so a crowd gathered. Oh, the riverboat. Remember when I told you I wanted a riverboat, Chris?
I do, and it just felt like the story needed some other finale, and I wholeheartedly embrace this, and it worked out fine. There was a lot of concern when you introduce a riverboat. You introduce possible problems.
Well, there's just a huge host of problems. The first of all being that you've got this huge moving platform that you've got to attach, like 15 characters to, and keeping everyone on the boat moving properly, but ultimately, of all the technical problems we saw in this show, I'd say this presented some of the fewest.
Well, now there was some great design here. One of the things being like the wheel being covered, so you don't have to see splashing water.
Yeah, well, that was part of my bargain when I told you I wanted a riverboat. I said,
and it would be on the far side of the boat.
I said it'll be on the far side of the boat. There'll be no water effects caused by the wheel.
Yes.
So it's actually a side wheeler instead of a stern wheeler.
One more shout out at the chicken joke.
Yay. So anyway, originally the ending took place in like 4 locations with lots of talking and very little singing, and I felt like, okay, let's take all that talking, cut a lot of it out, extend the song and put it all on a riverboat, and that'll give us the feeling we want for the end of the show. And it works so great. I'm thrilled. So thanks for the boat.
Good
Thanks
boat.
for letting me have a boat. That's great. And how can you have Huckleberry Finn without a riverboat?
Big
You know,
somewhere.
you can't. That's the answer. You can't.
And here's Lunt espousing his beliefs on the story from his little book again.
This is one of the most thoughtful comments we've ever had from Jimmy Gord, I believe. Which is why everyone else is surprised.
Mystified. Following in the theme of the Norm's Notes.
Norm's Notes version. Here we have a little bit of life back in QWERTY. QWERTY used to be a really active character, and then he kind of just turned into...
He had to work it.
All he did was turn his verse on. So we just kind of let QWERTY get in on the fun a little bit there, which is great.
Yeah, Larry, I think that's right. When you know what you should do...
Mike Naraki helped us shape this closing countertop here to make sure the teaching was right, and did a great job. We struggled with whether or not to use that verse because of the word sin. And it's like, do we really want to say sin? If we say sin, we have to kind of describe that. And I think Mike really found a great way of telling us what we needed to know about the verse, without getting too in depth about sin.
Yeah, it's a tough one to get a child's head around as far as understanding what doing something wrong is equated to sin.
Yes. In fact, Kurt Heineke told us when his boys went home after watching the show the first time, one of them wouldn't help the other. And so the one who wasn't getting helped went to Mom and said, "Mom, my brother isn't helping me. He's sinning."
All this cake and ice cream.
From Sherlock Holmes.
Remember, kids, God made you
Yeah, so Larry's been talking with his mouth full throughout the show, and Bob finally calls him on it.
Use your manners.
And that's it. I can't believe we're done.
There it is. Great show,
All
Brian.
finished. Hey, Phil,
Phil,
thanks.
Excellent work.
Sorry Phil couldn't be here for the
You
commentary.
did such a great job with
He's
it.
fun to commentate with. Hey, Joe, good job. We'll just pat each other on
And
the
Kurt,
back here.
we didn't
Kurt.
talk much
We
about
didn't talk at all about the score,
so we can talk about it
I'm going to
here.
talk about it now. Man, I love the score in this show. I really, Kurt and I agreed that it would be a lot of fun to keep our instrumentation very simple and very authentic. So he used instruments that he's, if he's ever used, only very limited basis. Obviously we had a lot of banjo. He had the mouth harp. He had, washboards. And so there's just this terrific, simple bluegrass vibe to a lot of the score. In fact, in the few times when we tried to put in like a really theatrical score, it didn't work because we'd set this tone of, no, the score on this show is bluegrass music.
And under the credits here, you really get to hear the great job he did in flourishing.
Well,
it
and
out.
obviously this isn't bluegrass. This is from the fair. And what's fun is doing research, I found that John Philip Sousa, the great march writer, musical writer, composer, was actually at the 1904 Louisiana Purchase Exposition and made performances on a daily basis with a marching band. And at first we were just going to put in some Sousa music, and then kind of very close to the end of production, I said to Kurt, like, could we do Meet Me in St. Louis as a march? And that's what that was. And man, that just turned out great. Again, John Troust animating Drippy.
Drippy the Drop.
Drippy the Drop.
If you've ever visited the offices here at Big Idea and seen Kurt Heineke's office, you'll know that he has a lot of instruments, lots of
And
little
he used every
noisemakers.
single one of them on the Silly Song.
He pulled them out all through the score. Silly Song, of course, was a great one, but he just really pulled a lot of things out to just have a lot of fun.
So
And
great
he's
job,
always
Kurt.
exploring ways to make music and rhythm, and he came up with some really fun things here.
All right, well, that's the show.
Thank you all for listening in. Hope you enjoyed our little discussion.
And thank you for supporting us in what we do here at Big Idea.
With Big River Rescue, the adventures of Tomato Sawyer and Huckleberry Larry.
Thanks, Chris. Good show.
Hey, Brian, thank you. Thanks for making another one for us.
We have like 5 more seconds.
We're going to hop to the D.
Thanks
1,
to
2,
my
3.
wife. Love you, honey.
All right. See you all next time.